no one could have me. You always hear about crazy ex-girlfriends in stories, but you never think you'll become part of one, until it happens. I was 21 when I met Sarah. She was 24, had a kid about 2 years old, and seemed pretty normal at first glance. She had a good job, took decent care of her kid, and while she wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, she seemed harmless. But like with many things in life, you never see the cracks until it's too late. After a few months of dating, I started getting restless. I was young, not ready to be a stepdad, and frankly, I was getting bored. So I ended it. Clean break. She didn't seem too upset. No drama, no emotional outbursts, just a shrug and a take care. I thought I'd dodged a bullet. A month later, I ran into her at a bar. I'd had a couple of drinks, and so had she. The conversation flowed easily, almost too easily. By the end of the night, we were back at her place. You know how it goes, ex-sex, no strings attached. At least that's what I thought. The next morning felt so normal. She made coffee, cooked breakfast, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. I left her place, thinking that would be the last time I saw her. I had classes that day, so I headed to campus, but something was off. Halfway there, I started feeling sick. Really sick. My stomach churned, and within minutes, I was throwing up on the side of the road. It wasn't just nausea. It felt like something inside me was clawing to get out. I barely made it to campus before collapsing in front of the nurse's office, heaving uncontrollably. My vision blurred as I was loaded into an ambulance. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the paramedic telling the driver to step on it, his voice filled with urgency. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, hooked up to machines, my body heavy with exhaustion. A doctor stood over me, his face a mix of relief and concern. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice flat, like he'd said this 100 times before. "You overdosed on meth, a lethal amount." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Meth? What the hell was he talking about? "You had about 5 minutes left before the overdose would have killed you," he added. "If you'd gotten here any later, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I couldn't wrap my head around it. Meth? I didn't do drugs. Ever. How the hell had this happened? That's when the door opened and 2 men in suits walked in. Federal agents. The doctor left the room without a word, leaving me alone with them. "Do you know Sarah Larkin?" one of the agents asked, his tone neutral, but there was something cold behind his eyes. "Yeah, she's my ex-girlfriend," I replied, still dazed. "Why?" The other agent exchanged a glance with his partner before stepping forward. "She's been under investigation for months. We believe she's involved with a local meth operation." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Wait, what?" The agent nodded grimly. "We think she laced your coffee with meth the morning after you slept with her. It was a deliberate attempt to poison you." My stomach churned again. But this time it wasn't the drugs. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. The woman I'd casually dated, the one who made me breakfast like it was nothing, had tried to kill me. After the hospital ordeal, just as I was about to go to bed in the evening, my phone buzzed with a text notification. I didn't recognize the number, but the message chilled me to my core. "If I couldn't have you, no one could." It turns out Sarah had family in the meth trade, and she had been involved in it for years. She cut a deal with the feds, turning on her relatives in exchange for a reduced sentence. They arrested her the day after my overdose, but I wasn't interested in the legal details. All I could think about was how close I'd come to dying. I should have walked away from her that night at the bar. I should have known something was off, but I didn't. My stalker read my story. I'm 41 years old now, divorced, and barely scraping by as a salesman at a retail outlet. I specialize in men's business suits. It's decent money. But between alimony and child support, I never have much left. I've been through hell these past few years. After the divorce, I started drinking heavily. There were days I'd stare at the pill bottles or razors and think about how easy it would be to end everything. but I never had the guts to follow through. I was in a dark place when I met her. It had been 6 months since my divorce, and I was still going through the motions. Work, drink, sleep, repeat. One afternoon while I was at the store, she walked in. Tall, elegant, and beautiful. She must have been around my age, wearing a charcoal jacket and skirt. Her hair was a rich amber bronze, perfectly styled. But it was her eyes that really drew me in. Deep brown, almost black, and unsettlingly intense. There was something about her, a familiarity I couldn't shake, though I didn't know why. She approached me with a coy smile. "You probably think I'm in the wrong store." I stammered out a response, my heart racing. "I'm sorry?" "This is a men's clothing store, obviously," she said, her voice smooth and playful. She looked up at me with those dark eyes, and I felt my throat tighten. "We do have some options for women. Pantsuits, jackets. If you'd like me to show you," I offered. She gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "No, I'm actually here to buy a suit for my son. He wants a tuxedo for his prom." Prom? In the middle of winter? Something about that didn't sit right, but she explained that the school had moved it early to keep the students focused on their studies. I let it go, too captivated by her presence to question her further. As I helped her pick out a suit, she stayed close, her floral perfume lingering in the air between us. It was intoxicating. We chatted casually, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. It wasn't just her beauty, it was something deeper. Something that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't pinpoint why. When she was ready to pay, I told her she could bring the tux back if it didn't fit, and we'd make adjustments. Her laugh was low and almost sinister. "Oh, don't worry. It'll fit just fine." There were no other customers around, and the other cashier was on break, so I took a chance. "Would you like to grab a drink with me later?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know what came over me. I never do things like that. She didn't answer immediately, just tilted her head, her eyes scanning me like she was sizing me up. "When do you get off work?" "At 7, I replied quickly, "if that's not too late." Her lips curled into a smile. "That's perfect. I'll pick you up outside." "And your name?" I asked. "Andrea." I repeated it under my breath as she left the store, her figure disappearing into the cold evening air. That familiar feeling of déjà vu lingered, but I pushed it aside. I had never met an Andrea before. The rest of the day dragged. By the time 7 o'clock came, I was jittery with anticipation. As I locked up the store, I spotted her car, a small blue station wagon, parked by the curb. She was waiting for me, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, her smile barely visible through the window. I climbed in and immediately noticed how cold it was. The heater wasn't on, and the silence inside the car felt suffocating. I tried to make small talk about the tuxedo, but she didn't respond. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, her eyes focused on the road as we pulled onto the highway. Something was off. I could feel it deep in my gut, but I ignored it. Maybe she was just nervous. After a few minutes of driving in silence, I asked, "Is the bar far from here?" She didn't answer. Her hands slipped into her purse, and my blood turned to ice as I saw her pull out a gun. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. She turned to me, her face emotionless, and whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" I froze, trying to place her. My mind raced, but nothing came. I don't know. Who are you?" Her eyes darkened as she whispered the name I had buried deep in my past. Alicia Moretto. The name hit me like a sledgehammer. Suddenly, it all came flooding back. The girl from my late teens. The one who had stalked me, who knew my schedule, who showed up at my house uninvited. The girl I had written about in that old horror story forum. I had never used her real name in the story. I thought I was safe. I thought I'd never see her again, but here she was, and she had a gun pointed at my chest. "I found your story," she said, her voice steady and cold. "I read every comment, every joke, every insult. You thought you could get away with it. You thought I wouldn't know. I didn't mean to hurt you," I stammered. "I never thought." "Shut up," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Do you know what that did to me? I lost everything, my family, my kids, and it's all because of you." I didn't know what to say. The weight of what I had done, the carelessness of sharing that story, hit me like a freight train. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how to get out of this alive. She gestured toward the glove box with the gun. "Open it." I hesitated, but the cold barrel pressed against my ribs made me comply. I fumbled with the latch, and out spilled hundreds of printed pages. My story. Her life, reduced to a joke, a creepy tale for strangers to laugh at. "I've been planning this for years," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted you to feel what I felt." We drove for what felt like hours, the dark highway stretching endlessly before us. I kept trying to reason with her, but it was no use. She was beyond reasoning, beyond saving. And then she pulled over to the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around us but fields and trees, stretching into the abyss. I knew what was coming. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this." She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "It's too late for that." I watched in horror as she raised the gun, but not toward me, toward herself. "No!" I screamed, lunging for her, but it was too late. The gun went off, the deafening crack of the shot echoing in the silence of the night. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I managed to get out of the car. I stumbled along the road for hours, covered in her blood, until a passing driver picked me up. I've been trying to forget, trying to move on, but the nightmares never stop. I still hear the sound of the gunshot, still see her broken body slumped in the seat beside me. The police questioned me, but they ruled it a suicide. No one knows what really happened that night. No one but me. And now you. The girl with green eyes. I had just graduated from college and found myself in a job that suited my introverted nature. A small cubicle, spreadsheets, and minimal human interaction. As an actuary at an insurance company, I was surrounded by silence. It should have been perfect. I thought I liked being alone, that I needed to be alone. But as the days stretched on, isolation began gnawing at me, slowly eroding my sanity. 6 months into my new life, the weight of loneliness became unbearable. It was like being trapped in a glass box, watching the world go by but never really touching it. I was 23, never had a girlfriend, and something inside me snapped. I needed to feel connected to someone, anyone. That's when I downloaded Tinder. I spent weeks on that app, swiping through profiles like a man possessed. At first, it felt exciting. Each profile held the promise of breaking free from my solitude. But the excitement quickly soured. No one matched with me. No likes, no messages. 30, maybe 40 profiles, and not a single response. My confidence, fragile to begin with, crumbled like dust. Was I ugly? Too picky? I didn't think so. But after a while, it didn't matter. Desperation took over, and I spent more money than I'm proud of on in-app features, premium memberships, anything that promised better results. Yet, there was nothing. Just silence. Always silence. Until that night. It was 3 a.m. on a Saturday when I saw her. Her name was Alexandria. Her profile was striking, almost too perfect. Long, fiery red hair. Skin like porcelain, flawless and pale. But her eyes, that's what caught me off guard. They were bright green, like emeralds, but with something unnatural about them. Something that seemed to cut right through the screen. Her bio was simple. Swipe right to be comforted. I swiped right. For the first time ever, I got a match. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, disbelief washing over me. I fumbled to send a message. "Hey, I'm Sam. You're my first match, and I'm really happy to meet you." Her reply came almost instantly. "Hello, Sam. I'm happy to meet you too. We talked for hours that night, and it felt perfect. Too perfect. I was hooked, completely enraptured by her wit, her charm, her laugh. We talked about everything. Life, work, hobbies. She seemed to know exactly what to say, as if she understood me better than I understood myself. And the more we spoke, the more I became obsessed with her. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about those piercing green eyes that seemed to follow me, even in my dreams. The next day, we arranged to meet in person. She was even more stunning in real life. The moment I saw her, everything around me faded into the background. Her presence was intoxicating. We walked through the park, talking like old friends, and when she kissed me, it was like every part of me finally clicked into place. I was no longer alone. I had her. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed every moment of our date like a movie on repeat. But something was gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Something about her eyes. Those green eyes that seemed to shimmer unnaturally in the dim light. I told myself they were just contacts. They had to be. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Alexandria moved in with me a few months later. Everything was perfect for a while, until it wasn't. It started with a cough, just a tickle in my throat at first. But soon, my lungs felt heavy, like I was breathing through water. I started coughing up blood. I told Alexandria, expecting her to be worried, but her reaction was unsettling. She barely flinched, her expression cold, distant. There was a flicker of something in her eyes when I told her. It wasn't concern, but rather disappointment. I went to the doctor, who ran all kinds of tests, MRIs, X-rays, blood work, but nothing showed up. Nothing that explained the weakness spreading through my body. It felt like I was slowly being drained, like life itself was being siphoned from me. The doctors were baffled. I was young, healthy, with no history of lung issues. Yet my body was deteriorating. It didn't take long before I could barely leave the house. And that's when things got worse. Alexandria started pulling away, spending more and more time at work. She would come home late at night, long after I had fallen asleep. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of voices coming from the kitchen. Her voice, and another, a deep, gravelly voice that made my skin crawl. I crept to the door, heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear. "He didn't last as long as I expected," I heard Alexandria say, her tone cold and emotionless. "Yes," the deep voice replied. "His time is nearly up. Only a few days left now. What will I do once he's gone? Patience, child. There will be others. There always are." I stood there, frozen, the blood in my veins turning to ice. I should have burst in, demanded answers, but I was too weak, too scared. I crawled back to bed, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. But there was no sense to be found. The next morning, I confronted her. I demanded to know what was happening. Who was that man in the kitchen? What were they talking about? She smiled at me. A slow, sick smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't worry, Sam. You're just tired. Rest now. Everything will be fine." But it wasn't fine. I knew my time was running out. I can feel my body shutting down. I can barely breathe. My chest feels like it's being crushed under a weight I can't see. Alexandria still whispers to me at night, telling me not to worry, that it's all going to be over soon. I hear her voice even when she's not home. Feel her cold touch when she's not there. It's like she's always with me, always watching. I don't know what she is, but she's not human. I'm sure of that now. I don't have much time left. If you see her on Tinder, Alexandria with her bright green eyes, don't swipe right. Don't let her in. Because once she's in, she'll never leave. And neither will you. You gave me gonorrhea. I found myself in another relationship. I guess I didn't want to stay single for too long, though in hindsight, I probably should have taken a break from dating altogether. I met Tina at a party, and she seemed cool enough. We dated casually for a few weeks, but it quickly became clear that we weren't a match. She was clingy, jealous, and overall just too much for me. So, I ended it. Nothing dramatic, just a clean break. Or so I thought. A week later, I got a call from her. I was expecting the usual post-breakup drama, maybe a teary phone call or a plea for closure. But what she said left me floored. "You gave me gonorrhea," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. What? I hadn't been with anyone since her, and I had no symptoms. I didn't even know how to respond, so I just went to the doctor to get tested. The test was brutal. They swabbed down there, and it felt like pure agony. But the results came back clean. No gonorrhea, no infections, nothing. I tried calling her back to tell her, but she didn't answer. Weeks passed, and I thought it was over. Then I ran into one of her friends at a party. After a few drinks, her friend told me the truth. The gonorrhea accusation had been a lie, a twisted form of revenge for breaking up with her. And if that wasn't enough, Tina had planned to tell me she was pregnant and make me pay for an abortion that never existed. Apparently, her friend had talked her out of it at the last second. 10 weeks old. You never expect the person you're dating to turn into a monster. At 18, I certainly didn't. I was naive, fresh out of high school, and like most people at that age, I thought I could handle anything. Then I met Ethan. He was charming, attentive, the kind of guy who knew exactly how to make you feel like the center of the universe. But looking back, I realized that darkness often hides behind the brightest smiles. We had only been together for a few months when the cracks started to show. It was subtle at first, little comments that seemed harmless in the moment but left a sour feeling in my stomach later. One night, I brought home a kitten, just a little fluff of fur, only 10 weeks old. His name was Milo, and he was everything to me. Ethan, though, he wasn't happy about it. "You love that thing more than me," he muttered as he watched Milo curl up in my lap. I laughed it off, brushing it aside as a joke, but there was something unsettling in his eyes, something cold. Later that evening, as we were saying goodnight, he asked if he could take Milo home with him. "He'll keep me awake on the drive back," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I said no, of course. I didn't like the idea of my kitten being in his hands. But when I wasn't looking, he scooped up Milo and left, ignoring my protests as he sped off into the night. My gut twisted with a sense of dread, but I told myself I was overreacting. Ethan was my boyfriend. He wouldn't hurt Milo. Right? The next morning, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I answered, already feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. "I woke up late," he said, his voice too calm, too flat. I jumped out of bed and accidentally crushed him with both feet. My heart stopped. I couldn't process it. My vision blurred as his words echoed in my head. Milo was gone. Just like that. The cold detachment in his voice chilled me to the core. He didn't apologize, didn't show any remorse. It was as if Milo was nothing to him, just a small, insignificant inconvenience that he had eliminated without a second thought. I should have left him right then. I should have screamed, thrown things, anything. But I was paralyzed, numb. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Ethan became possessive, controlling. He would show up unannounced, demanding to know where I had been, who I had been with. His once charming demeanor turned icy whenever I pushed back, and I started to feel like I was living in a nightmare. We were alone at his apartment, and I was trying to break things off. I told him I couldn't do this anymore, that I needed space, that he was suffocating me. His face twisted into something unrecognizable, a mask of fury and hatred. He didn't shout or scream. He just stood there, staring at me, with eyes that gleamed with something far worse than anger. "I know you think you can leave me," he said quietly, his voice laced with venom. "But if you do, you'll regret it." I tried to leave, but he grabbed my arm with bruising force. I fought back, pulling away, but his nails dug deeper. I managed to break free and ran out of his apartment, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. But the terror didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, I started receiving threatening phone calls from unknown numbers. The voice on the other end was always disguised, distorted by static and digital interference, but I knew it was him. The words were chilling, promises that I couldn't escape, that he would always be watching, waiting. One night, I came home to find a dead bird on my doorstep, its tiny body mangled and broken, its feathers scattered like ash. I knew it was a message, a warning, but I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to go to the police, too scared to tell anyone. He had me cornered, and he knew it. I finally broke down and confided in my brother, who confronted Ethan on my behalf. But that only seemed to make things worse. Ethan wasn't scared. He was enraged. He began contacting my mother, leaving cryptic messages on her voicemail, trying to get to me through her. My mother, bless her, scared him off after that, but it didn't give me any real peace. He was still out there, lurking. I finally worked up the courage to report him to the police, but by then it was too late. There wasn't enough evidence. The detective stopped calling, and the case was dropped. I was left with no closure, just a lingering sense of dread that never fully went away. I don't know what happened to him after that. Maybe he moved on, found another victim. Maybe he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. I'll never know for sure.